Waldy and Bendy.
Hello and welcome to the podcast they could not stop, Waldy and Bendy's Adventures in Art. I'm Waldemar Janustak, art critic of the Sunday Times, and usually I'm in London, but this time I find myself in the city of dreams, Venice, the beautiful Serenissima. Now, joining me on the podcast is the art historian and celebrated art detective Dr. Bendor Grosvenor. Now, he's usually in Scotland, but this time he's just come back from Naples. So, ciao Bendy, how was Napoli?
Naples was exciting, and well, I'm distressed to imagine we were passing like Ryanair flights in the night. We didn't end up in Italy at the same time. What fun we would have had. We must make a plan for that in the future.
I know. Look, I stood on the Giudecca here in Venice and I waved up at the sky as the planes came over in the hope that you would see me outlined against the Venetian sunlight. But I know, obviously, you miss me. Indeed, what a close shave we had.
Yeah. Well, obviously, we encourage all listeners to go to Venice and Naples. It was my first time in Naples. We went primarily to go to the Roman ruins, to Pompeii and Herculaneum, and my goodness, the excitement, Wild, of wandering through those streets, I don't think is like anything else in the whole world. Isn't that an amazing feeling?
Pompeii, it is. I mean, you chose the right time of year to go because it was coolish, wasn't it? I've been a few times in the heat of midsummer, and it can be a bit of a nightmare. I mean, those rocks and stones, those well-worn Roman paths, they seem to store heat and blast it back out at you. But it's an amazing place. I mean, particularly if you have some sense, because you get lost there a bit, can't you? You're not quite sure where you are with all the ruined buildings and streets. If you have some sense of what happened where, fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, and I just get more and more excited as my art historical adventures go on about seeing context and understanding works of art in the context. And, like so many people, Wild, we've begun our art historical journeys in museums, right? But when you actually go to sites like Pompeii and you still see the original paintings on the walls and some original statues still there, it all becomes so much more powerful. And while I think now, straight into my top contextual art historical moments ever, was going to see a work by Caravaggio, in Naples, The Seven Works of Mercy. You know that picture?
What do you mean, do I know it? I've banged on about how great it is on this podcast and various other places. It's a fantastic picture. I totally agree with you. In the Trinità, isn't it? And that street that's otherwise full of pizza restaurants, suddenly you come across this little church. You go in, and there it is, this amazing, amazing Caravaggio picture with so much in it, Bendy.
Yeah, I think it's straight in as my favourite Caravaggio, and I've never seen it before in life. So the painting, it's called The Seven Acts of Mercy, and it was supposed originally to decorate a church of the Piemonte della Misericordia in Naples. So this was this fraternity which was dedicated to advocating for the seven acts of mercy that you're supposed to do as a good Christian. And originally the commission was for Caravaggio to paint 7 separate panels showing the 7 acts of mercy, things like burying the dead and all that kind of thing. But then he changed his mind and put the 7 acts on that one giant canvas, which is why it's so busy and chaotic and full of drama and excitement. And the reason why it's gone straight in as my number one art historical context moment, right, is that actually it's just like the streets of Naples outside, isn't it? It's so busy. And you can immediately get back to that moment when Caravaggio's thinking in Naples, I've got to paint this chaotic, swirling, busy picture here. And he must have just looked around him in the streets. And there it was. And it's still there today. Mind-blowing.
Amazing. And of course, the fact that he, as you said, he was originally going to paint 7, but then he crowded them all into one scene. It does make it this extraordinarily busy image. And I don't know if you actually counted down the 7 acts that are happening in there, because it's quite tricky. Some of the people in it are sort of doing a double act, aren't they? And there's one of the acts of mercy is giving someone a roof over their head, isn't it? And I think I'm right in thinking that the guy that's giving you a roof over the head is also Samson, who's slaying somebody with a donkey's jawbone. So there's people are playing 2 roles at once in there. But it's such fun to find out what everybody's doing, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I really enjoy it, and I encourage everyone to go. I do have to say, I was a little bit, I'm concerned being an Anglo-Swiss, a good Swiss citizen, the rubbish in Naples disturbed me. But do you think, has it always been like that, or is it getting worse?
What do you mean rubbish? The streets not being like your living room and perfectly tidy and full of Swiss control. I mean, look, Naples is always Naples and Venice, where I am now. Both of them crumble, and they've been crumbling forever. And it's part of their charm, isn't it, that they look a bit decrepit. And of course, I mean, Naples is compared with Rome or Florence or Milan. It's the poor end of Italy. It is the place where the Italian supposed lower classes have always made a home. And it's also been this town, as you well know, full of all sorts of criminal goings-on and stuff. So, people like the garbage cleaners, they've got to belong to the right union. Otherwise, who knows, you could end up with a horse's head at the bottom of your feet. So there's a lot of that sort of stuff goes on. But for me, it just adds to the charm of it and the interest of it. And it is quite unlike anywhere else, isn't it? I mean, the last time I filmed there, I think this kind of gives you a sort of idea of the kind of place it is. We're filming Pompeii, but we're also filming some art in Naples. And I remember we were there for 2 days, right? So 2 days of filming. When we came back, we got 37 traffic violation fines.
Oh, no.
So 37 for 2 days. So basically every time we stepped into the car, we were done for something or other. So everybody's out to get the last euro and cent out of you in whatever ways possible, especially the police. So that's the kind of place Naples is. But it's exciting. It's when you get there, that little edge of danger. Like just the fact that when you stand on the hill at the back of Naples and look out, and there is Vesuvius looming in the distance on the other end of the bay, and the same volcano that sank Pompeii could kind of explode and get you any minute now, I think. So there's this lovely sense of hovering danger. It's full of amazing art. Did you see one of my very favourite Renaissance artworks, which is by Guido Mazzoni, and it's the big terracotta lamentation in the Santa Anna de Lombardy, I think it is.
No, we ran out of time.
That?
No, we ran out of time. We wanted to go there. We'll have to go back.
Oh, next time.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about the police trying to get every euro out of you. One of my rankings of cities is how enthusiastic the taxi drivers are to rip you off. And Naples has gone straight in my number one. Because they're always...
Of course it has.
But they do it with such charm, you feel like you can't begrudge them. But no, I just had such a nice time. And it was the most like going back in time that I've ever felt. And it knocks the socks off walking through a stately home or, however much the National Trust might try and light a candle to take you back to the 18th century in one of their stately homes. Nothing is like a combination of standing in the streets of Pompeii or walking through the historic centre of Naples. It takes you right back.
And I agree. I have to say I prefer Naples to Florence, not because the art is greater. I mean, you cannot compete with much of what is in Florence. But whereas Florence now feels like a picture book that you end up in and walk through, very neat and controlled and full of tourists, Naples is still a living place. It's still somewhere you can get lost, somewhere you feel a bit of danger every now and then, somewhere you can still get the best pizzas ever for basically no money at all.
Yeah.
I love that atmosphere that it has there. So if any of our listeners feel that they've got to go to Italy searching for a bit of excitement as well as great art, I couldn't recommend Naples highly enough. I loved it.
Yeah.
Were you with your family, by the way, Bendy?
Yes, it was my wife's, Ishbel's, her 50th birthday wish was to go to Pompeii, so we all went out together and had a lovely time, yeah.
Oh, did you take her to the Gabinetto Segreto in the Naples Museum? The secret little cabinet full of Pompeii's erotic art?
We did. Well, all the massive penises there. And when we were
You
in
did
there...
go?
Yeah, when we were in there...
I knew you'd go.
Yeah, no. Well, when we were in there was a very enthusiastic tour group of Italian pensioners being taken around, given a tour guide. And they were, me and Ishbel, being Brits, grown up in carry-on humour, were tittering like mad. But the Italian pensioners were taking it all so seriously.
Yes. Well, it's an amazing collection of things, isn't it? I mean, it's a lot that we need reminding of the fact that sex has always been important, crucial in art. But it is sometimes good to just have it, as it were, facing you so directly.
Yeah.
There are an awful lot of penises in the Gabinetto Segreto. I'm so happy you liked your time there. I loved it. Listen, Bendy, last week, in the last podcast, we talked about Iran. I went there once and I was very keen to point out the marvellous things I'd seen. And we've had quite a few listeners have replied to that, including some listeners from Iran, or indeed people who are abroad, who are Iranian in origin. I just wanted to say hello to them because they sent me some very, very warm notes, which I very much appreciated. So, there's Mr. Mustafa Motsafari, who is in Australia with his wife. So there's two of them, ex-inhabitants of Iran living in Australia. They sent me such a lovely note about how they love the podcast. So I'm very grateful to them. And also a lady in Munich, whose name is Yamnejad Bosse. Sorry if that's badly said. 84-year-old Iranian woman. She's been living in Germany. She was so pleased to hear us saying something positive about the art of Iran, saying something that touched her. So I was touched by her message, and I think we should just mention her. While we're mentioning people, I have to mention this chap called Chris Hansen, who's from Montana. I think he's our first American listener in Montana. And Chris wrote in to say how much he loves the podcast, and he said that he thinks that I would never say "yeehaw" on the podcast in order to communicate that I read his email. So, especially for Chris Hansen, yeehaw indeed. We are so pleased to have listeners in Montana. Indeed, we're pleased to have listeners everywhere in the world. It's wonderful to hear from all these people. Don't you think, Bendy?
Yes, hello international listeners. Hello listeners in and from Iran. We are still with you, and we hope to share more Persian and Iranian art in future.
Indeed, let's hope so. Oh, God, if only we could, right? Anyway, it's a busy podcast as always, Bendy. I don't know, when you were in Naples, did you see lots of people carrying bunches of flowers around for their mums and wives? I mean, usually bunches of yellow mimosa. Did you see that?
We saw yellow mimosa being carried around a great deal, yes. Lovely to see that.
Yeah. And you know why, right?
You're going to tell me. I thought it was some local feast, local Saints' Day.
No, well, it is, but it's more significant and wider reaching than that. So in Italy, it was the Festa della Donna, the Feast of the Woman. So this is this specifically Italian celebration they have, where usually they give each other to their mothers, their wives, their sisters. The guys usually give these bunches of mimosa. It's very lovely to see because it brightens up the street, doesn't it? Mimosa, that's bright yellow plant. Anyway, also, as you know, Bendy, March is the International Women's Month. It's the month of women artists. And I never let it be said that Waldy and Bendy are anything but fierce supporters of women's art. So later in the podcast, we're going to be looking at two women artists who we feel have been underappreciated. We're going to be deciding, I hope, which one of them deserves even more serious attention as Waldy versus Bendy. So that's coming up. First, though, as always, a reminder that the art world never, ever sleeps. It's shocking news from the art world. Shocking news from the art world, Bendy. The big shock just recently, was that they found another Rembrandt. Now, so much of recent art and history seems to consist of people getting rid of Rembrandts and saying that they're not really by him. And now we're going the other way again. We're adding to his oeuvre. And this new one sounds really exciting. Can you tell us about that?
A lovely article in the Burnetter magazine showcasing 2 years of research by the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam on this little picture, which shows the vision of Zacharias in the temple. And it's painted in 1633. It is actually signed Rembrandt, but it's one of those classic cases of a painting which used to be considered Rembrandt until around about the 1960s, and then it got chucked out with roughly 300 other Rembrandts that used to be considered Rembrandts. We've talked about this story before on the podcast, and now finally it has been rehabilitated again. And I don't think it would go straight into my top 20 of Rembrandt's world. I don't know about you, but I think it's a very interesting early work. Do you want to describe what we see to listeners and what the subject is?
Well, I think you're better at describing it than I am because, like all Rembrandts, it's quite unfocused, isn't it? I mean, it's difficult to see into the gloom. We're in the temple. A chap's holding a big book. I presume that's Zacharias. And there's stuff going on the right. And I'm not sure what it is because it's set in the darkness. There's a table. There's something glittering on the table. It's one of those Rembrandt paintings that consists almost entirely of illuminated moments of drama and dark moments of drama, and they're kind of interfacing interestingly with this blooming figure in a costume in the middle. Fascinating looking picture, but if I saw it, I wouldn't know what it represented.
Yeah, I think you describe it really well. It's that moment in the 1630s when Rembrandt is beginning to explore this idea of light and dark and narratives that are half explained. So the biblical moment is when Zacharias, as you say, he's in the temple. We're actually in the Holy of Holies, Wild, in the temple in Jerusalem. And he's got his book there and he's preparing for service. And then a vision comes from the Archangel Gabriel. And that's that little glimpse of light on the upper right-hand side of the painting. Now, Rembrandt being Rembrandt, he doesn't show us the vision, right? And this is the moment in the Bible when Archangel Gabriel comes down to Zacharias and says, Zacharias, you're going to have a son, and this is going to be St. John the Baptist. And Zacharias and his wife Elizabeth are quite old by this point, and it's a shocking moment to him. And while Rembrandt is showing us that moment of suspense and drama when Zacharias says he's not only just encountered this vision from the Archangel Gabriel, but he's not quite sure if he actually believes it. And as I'm sure you know, later in the story in the Bible, Zacharias is struck mute, dumb for a moment, because he didn't initially believe it. So Rembrandt is taking us to that moment of uncertainty and drama, and of course, it's represented all by light and dark, and that is, from this point on, 1630s, Rembrandt is all about that for the rest of his career. So this is one of those early, really quite formative pictures, and it's lovely now to have it accepted again.
It's such a pregnant moment, this, isn't it? So it's the male equivalent of the Annunciation, where the Virgin Mary is told by the same angel, Angel Gabriel, that she's going to have a baby and that the baby's going to be Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And before that happens, Zacharias is told by the same angel Gabriel that he's going to have a baby too. His wife Elizabeth, who is Mary's cousin, is that right? Saint Elizabeth is Mary's cousin. She, even though she's of an advanced age, she's going to have a baby. So this extraordinary kind of baby-giving moment, this is the masculine version, and the Annunciation that we see in so many, many paintings is the feminine moment. But the thing about this is it's not often painted, is it? I mean, I've been trying to think of other paintings of Zechariah receiving this information, and I can't actually think of any. I mean, there are other Zechariases in art, but that's a slightly different Zechariah, isn't it? I mean, for example, in the Sistine Chapel, up on the Sistine ceiling, above the main door as you go into the Sistine Chapel, there is Zechariah sitting there with a book on his lap. But that's Zechariah the prophet. So he was the prophet who announced the end of the world, that was coming, and he foretold of Jesus Christ's second coming. So absolutely crucial prophet in the Bible, but he's not the same one as this Zacharias. So just as there are lots of Marys you can get mixed up with in the Bible, so there are lots of Zachariases. But this is an unusual scene, actually. As I said, there are very few examples of it by other artists. So fascinating to see it. And you're so right about the implication of the message, the way that it's just this little patch of light in the corner, suggesting that Gabriel is there and communicating, presumably through the Holy Ghost, as it were, this message to Zechariah. You don't actually see the angel, you just feel the angel's presence. So very, very, very Rembrandt, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's quite fitting, actually, that the rediscovery of this picture helps illuminate a kind of what I think and hope will be a renaissance in Rembrandt studies, because as I mentioned at the beginning, and as we have discussed on the podcast before, Rembrandt's oeuvre went through a period in the 80s and 90s when it was whittled down by the so-called Rembrandt Research Project from around about 600 paintings to less than 300. And eventually that project collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. It's interesting, this particular painting, which is signed, a huge, big, fat signature bottom right, Rembrandt, you can't miss it. And one of the reasons that the Rembrandt Research Project ended up chucking so many Rembrandts out, including this one, is that they developed this idea that Rembrandt added his signature to paintings entirely by his students. And there is absolutely no contemporary evidence for this, and indeed it flies in the face of other contemporary artistic practice. The way this theory developed in the Rembrandt Research Project is they looked at paintings like this and decided they weren't, in their view, good enough to be by Rembrandt, but they noticed they were signed. So they came up with this theory that, well, Rembrandt must have signed pictures by someone else because they're not good enough. And so you've got this shrinking of Rembrandt's oeuvre down to less than 300 paintings, which I think, if you average it out, is something like 5 or 6 paintings a year. Impossibly low. So now gradually we are beginning to take things, I think, a little bit more rationally in Rembrandt studies, more seriously. We are bringing the wonders of science to the fore. So there's all sorts of technical analysis that's gone on with this painting that can help prove it's by Rembrandt. And I'm so hoping, well, because I genuinely believe that we're probably down maybe as many as 50 to 100 Rembrandts out there in various stages of pictures that are either all by him or partly by him in his workshop. So I'm hoping that, and I'm really glad the Rijksmuseum has taken the lead on this, that this is the beginning of more. And I'm not just saying that selfishly as, someone who aspires to go and find lost paintings by various people. I really do believe that we would be doing more justice to Rembrandt by rehabilitating more paintings like this in the future.
I agree totally. I mean, that Rembrandt Research Project, it got inane, didn't it? The number of things they crossed off. At one point, they were even questioning the great Polish writer in the Frick collection, probably my favourite Rembrandt, which we've talked about on this podcast. It got silly. It was a case of art history getting out of control, really, I think. On which subject, or rather slightly off the same beaten track, but on the same idea, the idea of art history, you recently wrote an article that I found deeply depressing, Bendy. It popped up in the art newspaper, and in this,
All my articles.
but this particular one it hit me in the gut. If you really want to know, honestly, it absolutely knocked me out. And it was about the decline of art history as a subject that's being taught in schools, that people are taking at exam level, and that they're studying at university. I studied art history. I know what it gave me. It gave me everything. There is no better subject to study, in my view. In the entire canon of anything you can study at universities or colleges, there's nothing better than art history, in my view. And yet, the story you told me was deeply depressing. I mean, there's something like, was it only 800 or so people took an art history A-level in Britain last year or the year before? Only 800 people in the whole of Britain. I mean, that is absolutely devastating information for someone like me. I mean, what the hell's happening, Bendy?
Yes, you're quite right. The subject last year at A-level was taken by, I've got the number here, 830 pupils. Well, and that is a significant decline. So it's been in decline for a long time. Maybe 40 years ago, it was about 4,000 pupils used to take a higher exam in art history. And we are seeing this reflected, of course, in the numbers who go on to study it at universities. So I think the number last year, equivalent at British universities, around 1,200 students, and that's been in decline too. So there's something going fundamentally wrong. We could get onto that. But while there is within that statistic, I think, an even more concerning one, and that is that of those 830 pupils who did art history at A-level in British schools last year, by far the large majority of them, 3/4 of the schools that provided the A-level were private schools. So this has always been a subject which has had problems with serving elites, and it's now becoming even more elitist than ever.
That is so tragic. I mean, I was born on a Polish resettlement camp. Where I lived, people used to bathe their dogs in the bath, and I would spend the mornings putting the dog's hair out because we shared this Nissen hut with so many other families. Art history came to me as this joyous, wonderful unleashing of possibilities and knowledge. What do we know about human society? We know what we've learned by and large through art. The earliest signs of human creativity we know about are the pictures that are drawn on the caves in cave art in Europe, in Australia, in the Americas, in the Africa. People have left their mark literally tens of thousands of years ago. So before we had spoken language, before we had music, before we had any of the other contemporary arts, we had art being scrawled on the walls of things. We had people making sculptures. We had signs of artistic creation. Every society there's ever been has made art. And what we know about it, to a large extent, is what evidence is provided by that art. So you've just been to Pompeii. What do we know about the Romans? We know a lot of stuff only because of the art they left behind. The same with the Greeks, the same with the Egyptians, the same with everybody. If we are not studying art history, then we're not studying ourselves. We're not getting an awareness of the whole of human history. I think it's absolutely tragic, and it must be to do with the way these things are being presented to the audience. If people don't see the innate fascination and importance of art history, then I don't know what's happening. They must be being told the wrong things. What do you think's happening?
Well, I think, there's a number of reasons, and we may not have time to go into them all, but there are some broad structural ones. I think there's a political decision was made, in the governments maybe sort of 10 years ago that young people should be doing more what they call STEM subjects. That's science, technology, engineering, maths, that kind of thing. So, liberal arts, humanities subjects have been deprioritized. And in fact, in 2016, there was an attempt to abolish the art history A-level altogether, which happily people like you and I helped see off. And there was a campaign from all sorts of people who helped to see that challenge off. But, art history is itself already an expensive topic. And one of the reasons for that is, art history textbooks are expensive. Particularly in this country, a problem we have is that our museums, who are the custodians of so many of the artworks we want to use to teach children and students at university, insist on charging these image fees. So that makes the materials for studying art history very, very expensive, which in an age when money is short and education budgets are being cut, is a problem. I'll just give you one example. Well, the William Dobson self-portrait that the Tate recently bought. Do you remember? They bought it jointly last year with the National Portrait Gallery for, do you remember how much?
Is it 3.5 million, something like that?
2.3. Just looked it up.
2.3, okay.
2.3 million.
Plenty of lolly.
Plenty of public lolly, right, for a publicly owned painting. But if you're a teacher or you're an academic lecturer at university and you want to illustrate the Dobson on your website for students for 1 year, the Tate will charge you £55 to do that. If you want to have a decent image of the Dobson to use in a single lecture in a school for which you don't charge, it's purely educational, to get that image will cost you £20. So can you see that? That's just one picture, right? If you want to have a class on Dobson or portraiture in the Civil War, suddenly that's hundreds and hundreds of pounds if you're playing by the rules and you want to get decent images from museums. So can you see the problem here? It's already an expensive subject.
It is. And if you want to see art, you've just been to Naples. I'm in Venice as I speak. You have to go to these wonderful places where you can find it in context, see it in the churches, see it in the museums, and it costs money to get there. So I do understand all that. And I think there must basically be an onus on governments and people that run things. They must begin to start realising how important it is to get away from STEM subjects sometimes and to sort of widen their idea of what's valuable in education. That's what we're talking about, isn't it? And look, England in the 1960s, swinging 60s, look what England did. It had fantastic pop music, great art, pop art. So many things were going on. If you look at, for example, who did all the pop music, the guys out of the Beatles, John Lennon went to art school. The guys out of the Rolling Stones, Keith Richards went to art school. Everybody went to art school. All the fashion designers went to art school. They went to spaces where they weren't taught something limiting and specific, but where big ideas of creativity could emerge. And that led to this fantastic moment of international creativity. I mean, where would Britain be without the 1960s and the things that the 60s produced? In terms of soft power, in terms of influence in the world, it was enormous. People are still turning up in London today, really, because they're attracted by things that happened then. And those are intangibles. You can't actually put a figure or a vivid or clear description of why those things necessarily lead to other great things, but we know they do. And it's so short-sighted of people not to realise that. And if only we could for once have ourselves a Prime Minister or even a Home Secretary that knew about art, that valued it, that treasured it, or someone in charge of culture and media that had some sense of how important it is. But we never do we? We never do. So people like you and I, we bang on these little podcasts that nobody listens to, and we moan and moan about it, and we're not really heard. You and I know in our heart of hearts that there is almost nothing as fruitful, as educative, as important, as rousing, as exciting, as multivalent as art history.
I think it helps form the mind. It helps make you understand and question the world around you. And I have to say, well, in a future which it seems that the machines in the form of AI are going to be doing so much for us, some of the first stuff they're going to take over is all the sciencey and STEM stuff and the mathematical stuff. And really, I wonder if we should be reprioritizing the kind of education that just helps people to understand things and question what they see in the world. You mentioned the Prime Minister. Now, the Prime Minister in this country is Keir Starmer. Now, he does like the arts, I have to say. Stand up for him. He's a musician. And I was very pleased that before the last election, he signed off on a Labour arts manifesto which promised to abolish these image fees, particularly in educational use. And, well, that has not been followed up on. So we need to see action on that. It's been completely forgotten about by the Labour government. There is, well, I do want to say, I'm going to take my art historical life in my hands here and end this little section on wondering what's gone wrong with art history by asking our colleagues in academic art history to help us join the fight in popularizing the subject. And I think academic art historians, by and large, do a brilliant job. They are dedicated, passionate people, but the subject is at risk of being taken over by a smaller group at the top, which is trying to take art history in a direction which I think is putting young people off wanting to study it. There was recently a QAA, a Qualifications Authority. This is one of the bodies that helps determine what is and how subjects are taught at university level. There's a recent document, you can look it up on the internet, a benchmark document for art history, and it makes for extremely depressing and grim reading. The subject is in danger of being so taken over by our politics and theory that it's almost bewilderingly incomprehensible. I think the most alarming part of that world is language. The way art history is increasingly taught and discussed in academic circles is in a language which is so jargon heavy, and it feels, and I'm sure it is actually, designed to be exclusive and is designed to put walls up, because they want to take themselves seriously as a professional subject. So you get this kind of exclusionary language, and I think that really, really puts young people off, especially young people off from wider backgrounds who we're trying so hard to get to take this subject seriously. We've got to stop talking like this about our subject, and I want us to all think more deeply, Wild, about how we can get young people into art history in future.
You're so right. I mean, I know in my programmes, the films I make, I always feel it's really important to talk to people in a language that communicates easily with them. And that's not because I'm stupid, and that's not because I don't know any long words. That's because art is about the simple things in life. It's about life, it's about death, it's about love, it's about sex, it's about horror, it's about dreams, it's about transfer, it's about things that happen to all of us all the time. Yeah. It's madness not to be able to discuss it in that way. Anyway, listen, let's make you the new head of culture in Britain and indeed in Europe, and indeed, why not? Let's go the whole world. Bendorf for world cultural leader, and let's hope something changes. And in the meantime, we could just sit and cry a bit, because art history it seems to be, at least in most academic circles, on the way down, which is absolutely tragic. Fortunately, not on this bloody podcast. On this podcast, it's on the way up. And in fact, we're going to go now, move on to this great subject of women artists. Absolutely crucial, couldn't be more pertinent. And it's something that you and I need to look into deeply, but also we kind of need to go mano a mano on this a bit and see who's right about the most underrated woman artist of recent art history. Let's see who's going to win that one, Bendy.
Waldy versus Bendy.
Well, I didn't know we were discussing women artists in the form of a fight between you and me. I hate these fighting moments. In fact, I was thinking of you in the amphitheatre at Pompeii, where there's all this extraordinary stuff for the gladiators' barracks. And one of the paintings I saw in the museum, actually, that they'd recovered from the walls of Naples, from the gladiatorial barracks, showed a gladiator who I thought looked not unlike you, in fact. And my build is so ungladiator-like. You'd have speared me with your Poseidon spike within 5 seconds, and I'd have squealed and ended horribly. But let's talk about these lovely subjects with a little bit less violence, shall we?
No violence at all. I just thought, basically we are a couple of middle-aged blokes, and we can't hide from that, and we need to, although both of us feel it both important and really significant to be able to talk about women artists, I just thought blokes will be blokes, and we should at least pretend to enter a little bit of spirit of mano a mano in this. Of course, you present who you think should be not underrated in the way she is as an artist. I'll present who I think. And of course, we must let the wonderful Taya, our presenter, producer figure, our major female presence on this podcast, the woman that basically runs it, we're just the puppets in her hands. Let her decide which of the two she finds more underrated. And perhaps she won't find either of them underrated. And the whole thing might well end up being a bit pointless. But let's go on. Who are you going to pick as your underrated female artist?
Oh, someone I really love, Joan Carlile. Have you heard of Joan Carlile? She was the first commercially aspiring professional oil painter in English history.
I must have heard of her because I think I've seen something by you about it somewhere or other. I know nothing about her, and I have to say I always thought the first commercial British artist, female artist, was Mary Beale, but you're going to set me right on that, aren't you?
Yeah, Mary Beale is the first one who actually makes it as a commercial success. Joan Carlile tries to make it commercially, but for reasons we'll discuss, doesn't quite succeed. But I think that makes her story so much more interesting.
So what is her story? I know nothing about her. Go on.
Oh, we're starting with Joan, are we? Okay. Yeah. All right. So, and you're going to talk about Tamara de Lempicka afterwards, is that right?
No. I'm going to talk about Tamara de Lempicka, not Lempicka. We're going to discuss pronunciation. Mr. Bendor Grossvenor. If you're going to be calling Lempicka, you're going to be Grossvenor to me. Very important Polish pronunciation. But yes, go on.
Okay, well, Joan Carlile starts, there's a key date in 1654, when she moves to Covent Garden. She takes a studio in Covent Garden, which then was one of the kind of artistic centres in London, where artists had their studios. Peter Lely also has a studio there, for example. So Joan Carlile takes her brushes and her canvases to Covent Garden in 1654, and she decides, I'm going to make it. I'm going to try and make it as a commercial painter. And she's really the first major female figure to do that. Now, I think the really interesting thing about her story, before we get into what she painted and how, is the fact that it takes so long to get there. 1654, you would think that it had happened before. But actually, it's interesting. There are so many reasons that not only is there the traditional chauvinism and misogyny of society in this country and Europe indeed back in the day, but it was particularly concentrated in England because, of course, we had the Reformation, Wild. Do you remember that? This was the moment we've been discussing in Italy. What was the feast day with the mimosa plant going on? What was the name of that?
The Festa della Donna, the Festival of the Woman.
Okay. Well, one of the implications of the Reformation in this country is that we go from being a country which venerated the Virgin Mary, and indeed we used to call ourselves in England Mary's Dowry to suddenly not being quite so interested in the Virgin Mary. And it's a hop, skip and a jump from that to people like John Knox, Calvinist preacher in Scotland, writing pamphlets called The Monstrous Regiment of Women. So life was already bad enough for women who wanted to be professional in any field. Before the Reformation, it gets even harder. So, but what's really interesting in the story of female artists in England and Britain, Wilde, is that painting was one of the few things that women could do, albeit not professionally. Obviously, this changes between the classes. So women were expected to, cook and clean and sew and have children, bring children up. Women of a certain class could do needlework and embroidery, but sometimes they could also paint, but not professionally. Now, things change when you have the Civil War. So the Civil War kicks off in the 1640s. King Charles I has his head cut off in 1649. And there is absolutely no, don't get me wrong, please don't think that the parliamentary regime was in favour of women's rights. It absolutely wasn't. In fact, it was probably worse, if anything.
They banned Christmas, didn't they?
They banned Christmas. They didn't like women. This was a Puritan regime. They didn't like women doing much at all. But the fact of the war shook the kind of societal kaleidoscope so much that things collapsed and happened in all sorts of unpredictable ways. So, for example, Joan Carlile's husband, Ludwig Carlile, had been a reasonably high-ranking figure in the court. He was a keeper of Richmond Park. He was a poet. And before the war, he's obviously a royalist. So he gives as much money as he can to the king's cause. When the king is defeated, Ludwig doesn't get any of that money back, and they are in hard times. Joan Carlile, who had been a reasonably successful amateur artist and had been given things like lapis lazuli by King Charles I, little gifts here and there, suddenly the chance is there for her to be the family breadwinner. So she chooses art, and she moves to Covent Garden and tries to be a portraitist. So now she paints in these very distinctive ways. So there is a picture at the Tate Gallery, Wilde, which is by Joan Carlile, and it shows an unknown woman full length in a white gown against a really beautifully painted kind of Claudian, maybe Dutch type golden landscape background. And Joan Carlile appears to have a reasonably successful practice painting these portraits. So over the last 40, 50 years or so, we've found, I think we're now nearly at 20 of these portraits of full-length, almost always figures, female figures in a dress in this kind of landscape setting. And the one in the Tate, which we can share with people on ZCZ, on the YouTube channel, is one of them. In fact, I found it some years ago while I sold it to Tate when I used to be an art dealer.
Oh, so it's a bendy sleeper.
It's a
Beautiful
bendy
picture.
special.
It's a absolutely wonderful. Do you know, I love these actually because they're like conversation pieces. There's a famous British genre, the conversation piece, which essentially one always thought belonged to the 18th century, really. People standing around the English landscape, kind of talking about stuff, and they had full-length figures. They had the sense of both a family in the landscape, but also this kind of sense of British life puddling on, wasn't there? These seem ahead of their time in that mood because they're not portraits in that three-quarter way that we usually think of portraits of the period.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. You put your finger on it. And what made her pioneering in so many ways is that basically Joan Carlile invents the English conversation piece, so almost 100 years before the blokes get to it later on in the 18th century. So another well-known example of her work is called The Stag Hunt World. And this is in a house called Lamport Hall in Northamptonshire. It's a lovely picture, and it shows Joan and her family and the family of Sir Thomas Isham, and the stag has just been hunted. You can see the poor stag lying in the middle of the ground there, but it is a conversation piece. They're engaging with each other, and they're in a landscape setting, and this is really quite radical stuff for the time.
It really is. I mean, it's a sort of thing you'd imagine Gainsborough to be painting at the start of his career, as you say, but basically almost a century later. Very, very prescient. Impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm glad you like it, and I hope listeners and viewers like it too.
The English conversation piece, you do sometimes feel that there are dolls in the landscape rather than people, don't you? And if you think of someone like Arthur Davis, or this has got that too, hasn't it? I mean, in terms of the actual figure studies and things, there is something almost like a miniature doll's house with people being moved around the landscape. But it's a charming thing.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm not one of these art historians who will say, the women were painting at this time and everything they did was brilliant. I'm not that kind of art historian. I'm frequently criticizing the works of male artists in terms of quality. Academic art historians are not supposed to make these what's called value judgments these days because they're too subjective. But it is true that the works of these early pioneering female artists like Joan Carlile, largely because they were forbidden from having access to things like life drawing classes, you do see a certain staticness in some of the figures. Now, actually, I think that is worked out of the system quite early on, and that's another one of the impressive challenges which are overcome. But while the story isn't one of happy endings, unfortunately, because Joan only manages to have her studio in Covent Garden for 2 years. And I think it's really interesting when you look at the known examples of her work that we have found so far, they're nearly all paintings of women. So she was patronized by women, but this was a world where the men still controlled everything, in particular the money. And it looks like enough men didn't sit to her to make a difference. And so she was forced to give up the studio and go back to live in Richmond Park in 1656. But a glass ceiling had been broken, I think we would say these days, well.
It's an art historical loss. And indeed, I mean, I had some experience of an artist called Catherine van Hemessen. I don't know if you know her, but she was essentially basically most of a century earlier, so a lot earlier, because she was mid-16th century. And she painted what I believe was the first ever painting of an artist's self-portrait where they're standing in front of an easel. So it's Katrina van Hemessen, and it's her painting her, the picture in front of her. But of course, there are lots of those afterwards. But she pioneered the idea of the artistic self-portrait. And that's a woman doing that in the middle of the 16th century. So absolutely pioneering. And she's got a show, by the way, coming up in London. I think it's next year. There's a Katrina van Hemessen exhibition coming. So these things are being talked about again. They're being rediscovered, which of course is a totally good thing. So very exciting, I think. But I wanted to move on to somebody I think a lot of people have heard of, and that is Tamara de Lempicka. Note the pronunciation.
Okay.
Yes, Polish pronunciation. Now, you see, this is meant to be a discussion about underrated artists, and there'll be plenty of people saying, Tamara de Lempicka, she's not underrated at all, I've heard of her. She's the queen of Art Deco. Doesn't Madonna collect Tamara de Lempicka? Didn't Jack Nicholson collect Tamara de Lempicka? And all those things are true. They are true. There was a time when Art Deco, which, as I think you and I know, because we're both art snobs, we both know that Art Deco it's the kind of introductory level of art, isn't it? The people like Art Deco, by and large, people like you and I look down on them and think, oh, they're going to grow onto other things. It's a bit like liking Salvador Dali. It's the entry level taste for great art history. I know I'm being snobbish here. I'm saying it just to annoy you in particular, but also other people listening. But it definitely was looked down on Art Deco. And so I think it became incredibly popular and rich people collected it. And Tamara de Lempicka in the 60s, 70s, 80s was this big star of Art Deco. And then, of course, when that mood changed and people turned against Art Deco, they turned against her as well. And she's been famous since then, but by and large looked down on and certainly completely misunderstood. So who is she? Well, she's Polish, Jewish, born in Warsaw, in Warsaw, in 1894, and she was born of middle-class, intellectual Jewish family who converted to Polish Calvinism, Polish Reformed Church. So she joined, as it were, the surrounding Poles in pretending not to be too Jewish. I think there was probably sinister reasons for that, but it definitely meant that she had identity issues from the start. Who was the real Tamara de Lempicka? She was born originally under a different name, so her name was Tamara Rosa Hurwitz, very Jewish name, but then she married this chap when she moved to St. Petersburg called Tadeusz Lempicki, Polish guy. As you know, in Polish names, Ski is the male version, Ska is the female version, and the names change depending on your gender. Okay. So she married him, and then he got caught up in the Russian Revolution, and they got turfed out. He'd been working for the Tsar as some kind of lawyer, I think it was, and they ended up in Paris. And that's where, in Paris, in the 1920s, she learnt to paint. Mm-hmm. And she was almost immediately popular. It's very interesting. I mean, after not much tuition, really, she became this sort of star of Art Deco art. And in interesting ways, I mean, she was almost immediately distinctive. So if you look at a Tamara de Lempicka picture, she used to paint rich people, true, but in a kind of cubist fashion. So quite often behind them there would be skyscrapers and signs of modernism, and the figures themselves would be kind of elegantly presented. And the thing I'm trying to get at is that almost immediately her style was distinctive. Everybody knew when they saw one, oh, that's a de Lempicka. And she wrote about this. She said, I was the first woman to make clear paintings, and that was the origin of my success. Among 100 canvases, mine were always recognisable. The galleries tended to show my pictures in the best rooms because they attracted people. My work was clear and finished. What's she saying there? She's saying that she is the first woman artist whose work was immediately unmistakable and it stood out in a crowd. And I think that is probably true. I mean, allowing for Polish self-aggrandizement, who before her, amongst women artists, could immediately be said to stand out in as dramatic a way as she did? I mean, we could argue about it. Probably Artemisia Gentileschi would be one of them. Perhaps even, Joan Carlile. But to the degree where immediately it was a Tamara de Lempicka art going in a new way, new type of picture being created, she was absolutely a pioneer. So that was interesting. And she produced scores of these paintings that absolutely seem to capture the spirit of the 1920s. Sort of people twisting about with great skyscraper buildings behind them, male and female. But where she becomes more interesting is what she then does with her identity. So her name changes all the way through. So she becomes Tamara de Lempicka, then she becomes Lempicka, so she changes her name a lot. And she changes her sexuality. So one of the things she becomes famous for is for painting nude women. And we now know that she was bisexual, so she had affairs with both men and with women. And she chose a journey for herself that was absolutely of her making. When she married the Polish guy, Lempicki, in Russia, and then she came back to Paris, she left him for a rich baron, and she marries the rich baron, and she becomes his wife, and changes her name to his name. Then she goes to America, and she ends up in Mexico. And at every stage of the journey, she's kind of controlling her destiny. And she is this beautiful, sophisticated, elegant presence in art. But she's also this woman who brings to her painting more than people realised. So look at one of a typical Tamara de Lempicka. There's a famous one of, I think, Madonna either owned or Madonna used in one of her videos of the green woman wearing a beautiful emerald green dress and a straw hat. So the poses for her art were all taken from old masters. She, as a younger woman, had gone round Europe looking at the museums, same places you and I have just been. So she went to Florence, she went to Naples, she went to Rome, she looked at Mannerist art. And what she produced was, if you like, an Art Deco version of the Mannerist pose. So these twisted figures bent a bit with contrapposto, the dramatic lighting and all that. Those were actually very sophisticated reworkings of old master ideas. And nobody else in art was really doing that in that way at the time. So she was taking art in this completely new direction. And she was taking the image of a woman, the liberated woman, who chooses her path, who doesn't have a path imposed on her by a man, but goes where she wants to go, who chooses her own sexuality, who chooses her own style, who's aware of her talent and who knows what she's got to offer. And those are the things that I think have been forgotten about her if we dismiss her just as an Art Deco painter. So that's my argument. I know Tamara de Lempicka is famous already, but I'm saying to you that there was far more of an important undercurrent in her work than we usually give it credit for. What do you say to that?
I entirely agree with you, Wild, and I'm just going to pause for a second because I'm looking up the auction record for Tamara Lempicka's work. Have I said that right? Lempicka?
Very good. That's
Okay,
it.
good.
You and I, we're going to pioneer proper pronunciation of Lempicka. Yeah.
All right, now, in 2020, how about this? Just $21 million, Wild. I think that's that's a lot of money. Don't get me wrong. Neither you or I are going around to be able to afford her pictures, and neither nearly all the listeners to this podcast, I'm sure. But relatively to the stratospheric sums that the blokes are still getting at auction, that's very little, don't you think? I think that seems a crying shame.
Well, I think it's quite a lot, to be honest with you, and I'm surprised it's that much. But then, well, I'm surprised on one level that it's that much. On another level, I mean, her art is really good, isn't it? I mean, I'd love one, wouldn't you? I mean, you would love to have one. You would really love to have one. And
I would far rather have one than a Picasso or a Basquiat or any of those big names.
Oh, I don't know about that, but I would love to have one. And the fact that it's underrated would appeal even more. But yes, I mean, I guess that pop stars buy her, don't they? You know, that's where the money goes. But listen, you and I, we've had our say here. Let's hear from the only possible true judge on this occasion. Let's hear from our fount of all knowledge, our producer Taya. Taya, in what I hope is a very equable fashion, we have presented to you two female figures we think are underrated. Take us out of our misery. Who do you think made the most effective argument here? Who's won? Is it me or is it me? Tell us.
Well, this was both very compelling arguments, and I'm in a bit of a pickle because I do feel that Joan Carlile is more underrated because I had no idea who she was. You seemed to not really know who she was. But I do prefer Tamara de Lempicka as an artist, and I think her story is more interesting. Make do with that what you will.
Taya, thank you for that. I think the only fair answer here is that they were both actually really, really interesting. Let's call it should we call it a score draw, all three of us? It's a score draw?
All right, yes.
Fantastic. The winners here should be women artists because they are the future, let's face it. Let's get rid of all these middle-aged and old blokes running the world. Let's get women to take over the whole caboodle, not just art history. For God's sakes, put us out of our misery. Anyway, listen, International Women's Month, international women artists everywhere. I send you my appreciation and my thanks. And it's been lovely talking about a few of these things on the podcast, despite the fact that art history is getting such a bad time in the real world. But women and women art continue and hopefully will bring us salvation. But that, from me, on that optimistic note, it's goodbye.
And goodbye from me. And Wild, you and Teo just give me an idea. I'm going to put up at the end of this video on the ZCZ YouTube channel one of the drawings that my daughter Gabriella, who's 11, did on her field trip with her mum and I and her brothers to Pompeii. She went round with her sketchbook recording everything. So I'm going to, if listeners and viewers want to see one of those, they can see the future of women artists at the end of this podcast. So thank you very much, and see you all next week.
Lovely.
Waldy and Bendy.